I'm Time Senior Editor Sean Gregory, and I'm joined by race car driver Lewis Hamilton, the six-time Formula One champion. Lewis, thanks so much for joining us on Time 100 Talks.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean. It's good to see you again.
First of all, Lewis, congratulations on making the 2020 Time 100 list. What does this honor mean to you?
Oh man, I was so surprised and very humbled when I got the call. I've had the privilege of being going to New York and going to the Time 100 Ball, and being amongst some of the great people that they represent. But this is particularly in a difficult year. This was such great news. I think this year has been such a challenge, and so to get recognition from really one of the greatest syndicates there is, it's really a privilege. So a big thank you to everyone.
With a win this upcoming weekend, September 27th in Sochi, Russia, you'll tie Michael Schumacher's all-time Formula One record for race wins with 91. You're poised to win a seventh championship, which would also tie Schumacher for the all-time record in season championship wins. And American race car driver Bubba Wallace, in his tribute to you for the Time 100, mentioned that 7 is a magic number in racing. In NASCAR, Richard Petty, Jimmy Johnson, and Dale Earnhardt Sr. have all won 7 championships. How important is it to you to win 8 or more championships and set a new standard for excellence in auto racing?
Well, firstly, it was a real shock and pleasant surprise to hear that Bubba had been so kind to write something nice about me. And I think Bubba's been so inspirational in what he's gone through, how brave he's been. And he and I have connected this year and support each other from afar. We, every now and then we game on our weekends off together, which is kind of cool. I've been in Formula One for 14 years now. And since I was a kid, I started dreaming of being a Formula One racer when I was 5. And my hero at the time was a guy called Ayrton Senna, and he had won 3 world titles. So in my mind, I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if firstly I can even get to Formula One? That's the dream. And if I get there, it would be amazing to emulate Ayrton, to do something like him. And, he won those titles, but also he moved a nation. He really inspired the whole of Brazil. And so he was a really impactful individual. So like I equaled him a few years ago, and which was very, very surreal. A long journey, a lot of sacrifice from so many people around me, particularly my family. And it feels very, very strange to have 6 world titles under my belt, because I watched Michael win all those titles at home, sitting on my couch and on the weekends if I wasn't racing. And no one ever thought that they would ever get close to that. And even I was like, I hadn't even put that on my list of to-dos, I was like, I've got to get there. But I am fighting for a 7th world title, which I feel very, very privileged. I've got a great team. I can never do it without great people behind you. I hadn't really thought about it too much, to be honest, number 7, because I guess I'm just taking it one race at a time. I'm focused on, I don't want to look too far ahead, but geez, to be able to match the greatest, arguably the greatest driver in the history of the sport, which not many people will ever get to do in sports history altogether, would be an incredible privilege. And I feel a sense of responsibility being that I am the only Black driver here in my sport. And unfortunately, there's not another Black driver coming up. It's not a diverse sport at all. And so I feel that I feel like I have a responsibility, firstly, to utilize a platform to really push for change within the sport. And when calling out and pushing for change, that's not just for drivers. It's even more so in the background with all the teams, which have thousands of people working in them, which are not diverse. And so on the journey to getting the 7th, of course, one at a time, I do plan to continue, hopefully. And if I get the opportunity, I will be pushing for more. But honestly, I don't know how long it'll be around, so we just have to wait and see.
Lewis, you mentioned being the only black driver. You've taken a knee, and your activism has been very, rampant since the death of George Floyd, particularly. You've taken a knee before races, worn Black Lives Matter shirts at races. Mercedes changed your car color from silver to black in an anti-racism message. At the Tuscan Grand Prix on September 13th, before the race and at the podium ceremony, you wore a shirt that said, "Arrest the cops who killed Breonna Taylor" on the front, say her name, above a photo of Taylor on the back. What kind of impact do you think your activism has had?
I think it's sometimes difficult to be able to gauge something like that when you're in the sport, when you're in the moment, when you're involved. I don't know how people necessarily perceive it from the outside. I know I've had great response from the people that are following me. I've seen fans put together videos of them also saying that about they're going through an educational process, they're learning new things they didn't know before. Some people doing videos, taking the knee. So it has been incredibly encouraging, some of the support that I've had. But it is, this thing is, it's not that I've been black. I've lived with this my whole life, and I have spoken about it a lot through my career in Formula One, but no one really listened too much. And when I had the racial abuse when I was in Spain, no one did anything. I was really just lucky that I had my dad there, who was the only black figure otherwise there to support me so I could lean on. But that couldn't happen today. And thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement, for me personally, that watching George be killed after we'd seen, and read about so many of these other tragedies, it brought up a lot of suppressed emotions that I hadn't even realized that I'd done. I think because you experience things, you experience abuse, and my dad would always say, "Do your talking on the track," so I suppressed these things, and it brought up a lot. And I was like, you know what, I've got a niece and nephew, and I'm like, I want to utilize my time and my platform, my voice, to change the future for them, for the other the kids around the world. I don't want them to have to experience what I experienced, and so many people experience way worse. So I felt a responsibility, and I think we all have a voice, but collectively, I think, as you can see this year, there's been a collective of a load of celebrities and people with great platforms and really pushing for change. And I feel really proud to be a part of it.
And after George Floyd was killed, you wrote on Instagram, Lewis, "I see those of you who are staying silent, some of you the biggest stars, yet you stay silent in the midst of injustice. Not a sign from anybody in my industry, which of course is a white-dominated sport. I'm one of the only people of color out there, yet I stand alone." Do you still feel like you're fighting racism alone in F1?
So, the message, whilst directed, was also kind of down to interpretation. So people out there could interpret how they wanted to. So, it wasn't just people within my industry. There was other sports stars that I admire and look up to, who have incredible voices, who I watch and support, who just stay quiet. Musicians who have the power to really educate the people that are following them, not just be cool, and the response has been, as I said, in my industry, the response has been great. I think it's a learning process for everyone. And, I'm on a lot of Zoom calls with the heads of my sport. Spent a lot of time with Mercedes. It was a long-winded conversation to get them to understand, what I've been through and what the world is, what is out there, because a lot of people are like, "Oh, I hadn't even realized." When you work in a team that's got almost 2,000 people, I would ask my boss, "So, like, why am I one of the only few people of color here?" And at the beginning, it was like, I hadn't even realized. And then, after working together, he'd be like, "There's not a lot of the pool that we're hiring from. It just doesn't seem to be many minorities applying for the job." And like, "Well, you've got to widen the net." And so we're working now. Firstly, we've changed the car to black, which Mercedes is a silver star. It's never shifted from silver. So that's a really important message, I think, that Mercedes are willing to, accountability, I think, is key. for all of us. I should have been done more. I thought that me just being in this sport would have shifted things, but it hasn't been enough. And so I'm making sure that I correct that, or at least apply my efforts and time. But the team's shifting. There's new training programs within my team that are happening, and I've also, I don't know if you know, but nobody's trying to find out. When I ask people why is it not diverse, no one in my sport knows why. They don't have an answer. So I decided to put together a commission, and I know there's a lot of commissions out there, but the commission, the idea is to try and understand what the barriers are, and understand why people of color are not finishing some of the universities. Some are getting through to the top universities, which these teams are hiring from, but why they're not finishing? Why aren't more people and young boys and girls not applying to be an engineer? And I want to understand that, and I want to work in terms of trying to, once I get this commission, we don't know what the results will be, we'll be able to give it to the industry and hopefully more industries so that they can apply a new method in terms of how they're hiring, non-biased training, all these sorts of things.
And a lot of people will be watching the Hamilton Commission for sure. But you've mentioned and you've pointed out that it's not always a united front. One driver who didn't join you in kneeling was Charles Leclerc of Ferrari. And he said, quote, "I believe that what matters are facts and behaviors in our daily life rather than formal gestures that could be seen as controversial in some countries." What's your response to that kind of thinking?
So I've spent a lot of time trying to talk to each and every other driver that I race with, and there are, I think, 7 or 8 or 9 or 7 or 8 that don't take the knee. Some of them were of the mindset that why should I take the knee for Black Lives Matter? They didn't understand it. And some were, well, I've never experienced racism, so it doesn't really, this doesn't include me. So I think ultimately it's education. Some were told not to take the knee from higher powers around them. And naturally I know who, but I won't go into the names. But what I have tried to do is reach out to those individuals and try to just spark a conversation, and rather than have them put their walls up, try to just educate them and also empower them. Say, look, you can be a part of this. We need you to be a part of this shift. And I'm trying to do that with the drivers, but it's a little bit harder because we're competitors also, and so it's a very, very fine line to navigate through. In terms of how people are perceived in their countries, because you've got a Russian driver who says that this won't be accepted in Russia. You've got a Spanish driver that will say that, this won't be looked upon very well in Spain. And those are guys I have to try and explain what I've been through and what people around the world are going through, and that this is not just only about Black people. It is about the inequality and injustices around the world. But it's, as I said, it's a learning process, and it's not going to be eradicated in one day, in one swift swoop. So it's something that I will continue to do. The thing for me, though, as I try to explain to them, Black people don't have the time to opt out, and in today's world, it's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist today. You have to be anti-sexist, and so much more. And if you could be racist, or you could be not be racist, but your being silent speaks volumes. And I think today, as I said, you need to be actively anti-racist. But the drivers are all wearing the non-end racism t-shirts, but I choose to wear the Black Lives Matter shirt always.
I'm going back to Bubba Wallace for a second. You mentioned that you guys have been in touch. He told us that you sent notes of encouragement to him during late night Call of Duty gaming sessions. But what did you think of Bubba's own activism in the U.S.?
I think it's a daunting thing to, from this side of the world, watching NASCAR. I'm a fan of. I watch a lot of U.S. sports. Big fan of NBA, NFL, and and I watch NASCAR, and I know that is also a very white-dominated sport, has been for a long, long time. I was really surprised and happy to see the response from NASCAR, the actual organization, and how they supported Bubba. I thought it was incredibly impactful, and I thought he was incredibly brave. Particularly in America, which, when you're in Europe and you watch over America, and I love America. I spend my winters there. I've dreamed of living there my whole life. It's just impossible, kind of, with a Formula 1 career at the moment. But also, it is, when you're watching from Europe, where there's not a lot of shootings, we don't have access to guns, the same as it is in the States. It's a bit more of a scarier place because a lot of the killings are happening there. There's over 1,000 people are shot every year by the police. So, I just thought that it was incredibly brave what he did. And I just wanted him to know that, sometimes people in those positions don't always hear the best things. And I was like, I just want you to know that I'm supporting you. You're doing incredible. And please keep going, because your voice matters. And that's I think that's important for people to hear.
Have you ever thought of racing over in the United States in NASCAR?
I have. I did years ago. I did a swap with my Formula 1 car and a NASCAR with Tony Stewart years ago. I think when I was a lot younger. Tony just about fit in my car, so but it was so much fun. It was at Watkins Glen, and the NASCAR was awesome. So I don't know if I'm ever gonna race over there. I haven't really thought about what would be beyond my racing. I've been racing since I was 8, so I mean it's going to be very hard to imagine not competing. Maybe I'll do some practice and see how it is. But I have been to watch a NASCAR race. Came to see Jeff Gordon. I think it was down in Miami. So you can never say never. But at the moment, no particular plans to race beyond Formula 1.
And Lewis, in closing, what changes do you hope to see both inside and outside racing in a post-pandemic world?
Well, I think this time obviously it's such a scary time, I think, to be living in. And I think none of us probably expected to be caught up in a pandemic like this. It's been really eye-opening to see how governments have behaved, leaders, which has been ultimately, for me personally, has been really disappointing. But I think for people who are living through this, being in a lockdown, being stuck in at home, I hope there's positives to come from it, in terms of time we spent with family, understanding what our real priorities are. And this is obviously having the pandemics is giving the time for people to be able to go and do these protests and really put a lot of pressure on the system around the world, because it's not only in the States. And that's really, I think, an important message. You've got, whilst you have the police brutality there, systemic racism is throughout the world. And I'm hoping that, and whilst I'm trying to push with this commission, working with like the Mayor of London, working with people who are actually in power to try and educate people and push for change. I think ultimately it stems down to education. So I'm really hoping, for me personally, like in England and hopefully in the rest of Europe, we'll be able to encourage people to educate these kids better, so they understand, I think, from a young age already, what inclusivity is, what equality really means. And the sooner we can help these young kids understand that, the better I think their future could be. So that's my kind of goal. As I said, I don't want my kids, my niece and nephew, or my future kids and your kids to go through and live in a time that we're obviously living in. So fingers crossed.
Thanks for joining us on Time 100 Talks, and congratulations again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.